Hello and welcome to the agenda. I am Ajay Kaul. In this program today, we will talk about the state of Indian economy. The figures of the economic status of the country in the last financial year are out. According to the data, India's gross domestic product or GDP contracted by 7.3% in the financial year 2021. This is the first time that the country has recorded negative annual growth. Is it only because of the coronavirus pandemic and the associated lockdowns and other restrictions, or there are some other reasons for such a situation? We will try to analyze this in the agenda today with two experts on economy, Professor Arun Kumar and Professor Yamini Agarwal. But before we start our conversation, have a look at this small report.
India's GDP contracted by 7.3% in the last financial year, which ended in March this year according to the official data. This is the worst ever economic performance of the country. Clearly, there was a huge impact of the coronavirus pandemic which broke out in early months of last year and prompted the government to impose a nationwide lockdown for about 2.5 months beginning March 25. Due to the lockdown, the first quarter GDP had contracted by 24.4%. But after the unlock period began, the government said the economy was recovering faster than expected and the growth would be V-shaped. According to experts, while the impact of coronavirus and lockdown cannot be discounted, the country's economy was already weakening since the demonetization announced on 8 November 2016 by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Another blow to the economy came from the poorly designed GST in August 2017. Subsequently, the GDP growth rate steadily fell from over 8% in the financial year 2017 to about 4% in the financial year 2020, just before COVID-19 pandemic erupted on mass scale. Business chamber FICCI said the GDP of minus 7.3% is better than expected, while Congress leader and former finance minister P. Chidambaram has said the economic performance of last financial year was the worst in 4 decades, not only because of coronavirus, but also because of ineptness of the Modi government. Chidambaram has alleged that the government policies are proving disastrous for the country. Bureau report.
Now let's welcome our guests, Professor Arun Kumar and Professor Yamini Agarwal. Welcome to both of you. So, Professor Arun Kumar, I first come to you about this contraction of 7.3% in the GDP. What is your view? FICCI says that it is better than was expected. What do you say?
So, FICCI is right, because it was earlier expected that the decline would be at least 8%. Now 7.3 decline is better than 8%. But I think the problem that comes is that, the unorganized sector data is not available for the quarterly data.
Right.
And therefore, even for the annual data, it is not really available. And therefore, these figures only represent the organized sector of the economy. The unorganized sector is not counted here. And it's the unorganized sector that was hit very hard by the lockdown, because people could not go to work, the streets were empty, etc. And the recovery was rather slow. It did not recover immediately. And therefore, even in January 2021, capacity utilization according to RBI was at 63%. So that means even the organized sector was 10% below what it was in January 2020. Similarly, the consumer confidence according to the RBI data was at 55.5, whereas in January 2020 it was 105. So consumer confidence was down, the investment was down because capacity utilization was down, and that's why we cannot depend only on the organized sector data. We have to look at the unorganized sector also. Now CMIE had said in April 2020 that 122 million people had lost employment, and that was recovered slowly. And bulk of that unemployment was in the unorganized sector. So we need to really incorporate the unorganized sector into our analysis before we can get a complete analysis. and this quarterly data cannot be the only one which we can depend on. And this advanced estimate is also, as you can see, is a third estimate. And this here also, if you look at the document, they are saying that the usual data was not available,
Yeah.
and that's why they are depending on alternate sources of data. In other words, the data is not comparable to the earlier data because that base has changed. So all these factors need to be taken into account to analyze the growth in the last year.
Okay, Professor Agarwal, Amni Agarwal, I come to you. First, your initial remarks, then we'll, before we proceed further on this, the data that has come.
About the contraction right now, which is about 7.3% in the economy.
And the fourth quarter results do indicate that there is a positive growth of about 1.6%, which is there, which does indicate that before the lockdown, there was recovery in the economy. And as a result, we did technically move out of the recession with positive growth in the last quarter and then the next quarter. As a result, we do see that the overall economy, while it was coming back to the recovery, did show positive numbers. Though there is a base effect which can be observed in the scenario. However, one needs to understand that the lockdown is a reason why the economic activities have been stalled. And as a result, there is not a specific cyclical effect or an economic effect which is causing the economy to have reduced numbers of GDP. The reason is that there is a lockdown and there is COVID, and the pandemic is causing the economy to stall and stop its activities, which is causing a resultant effect. Now, because of the vaccination drive which is going on and the decline in the numbers of COVID cases in the second wave also, there is a potentially strong case for the economy to recover back. Yesterday, certain states did bring about certain amount of an unlock situation which was there, and whereby they did, show that they were wanting to go back to the normality and recovery was sought over. And as and when the recovery would come forth, the GDP numbers would come back to their previous positions as they would be there. And because of the base effect, we can still see a positive growth. It may range from 9 to 11%. So we would see a positive growth. Though all the figures which we do indicate, especially trade, communications, transport, has seen a major severe, or hotels have seen a more severe decline of about 18%. Mining and quarrying about 8% and so forth. So there has been a contraction which is, nothing to deny, but the fact that there has been a conscious effort to save lives as well as a continuous effort to save livelihoods, these GDP numbers are still very promising in the light that the economy is taking time to both handle the COVID situation as well as bring about livelihoods in place.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, that contraction was expected because of lockdown and restrictions that were imposed because of that. But if we take the numbers before the COVID, I mean the numbers were still low at that time. If you see financial year 20, the annual growth was 4%, and I think last quarter was only 3.1% or something like this. So growth had already slowed down even before the COVID. What do you say on that, Professor Agarwal?
Well, we do see that, the fiscal stimulus and the monetary accommodative stances have been in the positive direction while the economy was slowing down. It did not reach a very slow level, but yes, it did reach a slow paced level. And because of which they did provide in the previous budget and this budget itself a fiscal stimulus in the form of large infrastructure spending to become more productive. Also, there were increased allocations for Mandeka. Specifically, if you even look at the stimulus packages which had been given in the previous budget, which were relating to, setting up educational institutions, which were relating to setting up, the
so that is mostly debt. That is, I mean, there is no liquid about that. I mean, liquid stimulus in that, no, isn't it?
So there was a stimulus which was being
It's a long-term
given by
process. Long
there
term.
was a stimulus which was given by the RBI also by keeping the interest rates low. So when they kept the interest rates low, there were accommodative stances which were provided by the RBI. And the Mundra scheme, which was a continuous focus on the MSMEs, which was there. Also, your rationalization of the corporate taxes, especially for the MSMEs, was also to pick up the growth.
Right. So, Professor Arun Kumar, I come to you about, as Professor Agarwal mentioned about MSME sector. MSME sector was the most badly hit. And we also talk about, when I mentioned about last year, I mean, pre-COVID figures were also down and it was on the decline from 8% to around 4% last financial year 20. So, can we talk about that our economic fundamentals are still strong or have been weakened already? What do you say?
So, you are right that the economy had been on the decline for 8 quarters before the pandemic. It had from a peak of 8.4%, it can come down to 3.1%. And therefore, the problems were coming from the unorganized sector, because after demonetization, the unorganized sector was very badly hit. Then GST hit it, and then the NBFC crisis and the digitization process, and then the pandemic hit. And that's why I was arguing that it's the unorganized sector that suffered the most even now, and that is not able to recover, because in the MSME sector you have micro, small and medium. Now,
but
small
as you
and
mentioned,
medium,
unorganized sector, we don't know how much has been the impact. We don't know. We don't have the data.
We do, because you see, the CMIE gave a figure that 122 million people lost employment in April, and of that, 1.9 crore were from the organized sector. The rest were all unorganized sector. So the unorganized sector, we know, got hit very badly. We also know that agriculture was hit badly, because in Q1, the fruits and vegetables could not come to the mandis, and in Azadpur mandi, less than half of the 2019 fruits and vegetables was coming. Similarly, the demand for milk fell because bulk consumption in hotels, restaurants, weddings, etc., that declined. Similarly, the poultry sector also suffered, because 1 crore eggs in the midday meal scheme, they were not being taken, and a lot of chicken was culled because people were not having that much chicken, because they were afraid that it might spread the virus. And similarly, floriculture also suffered because flowers could not come. So actually, the data for the Q1 shows that the agriculture sector grew by 3.4%. Actually, there was a decline by 10%, and that was entirely the unorganized sector. So we know that the unorganized sector was hit very badly. That's why my argument is that in the last year, the economy has not declined by 7%, but it's declined by about 29% to take the unorganized sector into account. And therefore, this year it was expected things would be better, and April definitely would turn out to be better, because last year April was a complete lockdown. This year it was partial lockdown. But May this year would be similar to May last year, because then also you had more or less complete lockdown. Here also you had 90% of the landmass under lockdown. And June would be worse than last year, because last year you started talking, but here now in June you are continuing to lockdown. So therefore, the rate of growth in the Q1 of this year would be not 20-25% as was expected, but more like only 5%. Now, what about next quarter? The next quarter, because you see, we are anticipating a second wave coming after this wave, because especially among the children. So the consumer sentiment is way down. If you look at the retail sector, it's down by about 45%, and that's largely the unorganized sector. And similarly, investment will remain down because capacity utilization will not pick up. And that's why in Q2 we will have negative growth. Now, for Q3 we don't know, because our vaccination program is lagging behind. We have started with 10 crore vaccination per month, ramped it up to 20 crore to get to herd immunity by December. At the current rate, we will reach herd immunity in 2 years. Therefore, in December also, we may continue to have large number of cases. And let us remember, even now, even though cases have come down from 4 lakh, there's still 0.5 lakh, which is beyond the peak of last wave. So therefore, the mutant can reappear. Mutants can come, like in Vietnam, a new mutant has come, which is very virulent. The third wave may be a very virulent wave. We don't know. Because
so uncertainty continues over it.
Investment is not going to be there. Consumption, especially if you look at the elite section, the middle class and the upper class, which do the consumption in the economy, there the number of deaths is very high. You look at Times of India obituary column. Usually there was half page of chapter page, now there are 2 pages, 4 pages. So there are 16 times more debt. Every family that you know of has had a problem, has had some thing. Plus there's a lot of indebtedness, health expenses have gone up. So middle class and upper middle class consumption will not revive like it did last year. And because of the uncertainty, investment will be down, consumption will be down. So I think this year also there will be 0% or negative growth. This 10%, 11% is all hypothetical, based on the idea that we'll quickly get over the wave. That we don't know that whether we'll get over the wave. Everything is pointing to uncertainty. And even the economic survey, the chief economist also said yesterday that there's huge uncertainty. We cannot predict. So therefore, all we can do is prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Right.
If things turn out well, that's great. But let's prepare for the worst. Let's pump in demand into the economy so that the businesses can revive. If
Right.
the cashew prices remain low, investment will not come up, businesses will not be able to function if there's a fear of the wave coming again.
Professor Agarwal, as you heard Professor Arun Kumar talking about a possibility of negative growth this year also, because the uncertainty still continues. But at the same time, Moody's has predicted that 9.3% growth for this financial year. What do you say? How feasible is it?
Well, I think the all estimates that are there is primarily on the fact that the lockdown would not be there and they would be restricted to the containment zones, which has been one of the prime messages which the Prime Minister did indicate that we need to save and protect the livelihoods together with the life. And that is why a complete national lockdown is not a possibility that we are looking at. Because of which the economic activities may not be completely at the full swing, but will come back to a certain level of normality. Maybe a little less, but little to the levels which are acceptable and associated with a lot of people. As and when these levels would come in, people would see the base effect. One of the important factors when we do talk about double-digit growth is also the base effect of the previous level. So when we see the negative growth and shifting to the positive level, we are also accumulating the positive growth which is there. So when we see 0.5% or when we see 1.6% or when we see a higher level, we do see that these growths are coming from a low base level. But what is also important is that the economy is stalled. It may not remain stalled for a very long time because the process of healing has already started in the process of vaccinations, which has started for the 18 to 45. Now, what most people are also trying is a vaccination for the children, so that the schools as well as colleges can be opened up for children also. Also, what is being observed is that people are being continuously made conscious of the safety protocols that are there, and a lot of preparedness has gone into from the first lockdown to this present lockdown, where people can, with safety, continue to work as well as perform, whether at home or whether at the factory, with certain amount of vaccination and come back to the recovery level. So I do fully appreciate that the situation is uncertain, as Professor Arun Kumar is saying, that we do not know whether there will be a third wave or not. But there have been proper preparations that have been made to see that the situation does not go out of control by looking into containment zones, by taking stricter actions and the immediate action of a lockdown, whichever state feels that there is a higher number. Also, health preparedness as well as vaccination are positive signs for the economy to grow forward.
Yeah. So, Professor Arun Kumar, when we talk about livelihood, as Professor Agarwal also mentioned about livelihood, so we have an assessment or some study which says that 23 crore people have been pushed below poverty line and into indebtedness. So, how much do you agree with that?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, as I said, large number of people in the unorganized sector have lost employment, and even in the rural areas, there have been people who've lost work. Because you see, what has happened is now the wave has spread into the rural areas,
Yeah.
and the number of deaths that are taking place there. So therefore, a lot of unemployment is there in the rural areas as such. And last year, many people had lost income and now they've lost income again. And therefore, they would have been pushed below the poverty line. And I think 23 crore is a conservative figure. Actually, the impact on the unorganized sector is much larger. So many more than 22 crore would have lost income and would have been pushed below the poverty line.
Professor Kumar, this may include even organized sector people also, middle class.
Yes, but I'm saying therefore the number could be much higher because the unorganized sector had lost much more employment.
Yeah.
And I would distinguish between employment and work. For instance, if you're
That
a
is why I
factory
mentioned
worker,
livelihood.
no, yeah, but as I said, we must distinguish between employment and work, because I may be employed in the factory, but my factory may not be working.
Right.
So I've lost work and I've lost income. A lot of people who remained employed also had salary cuts. And then, if you're a teacher, then, you didn't go to school to teach. So you remained employed but were not working.
Right.
You were a government officer, you were not going to work, but you remained in employment. So the work was lost by much more, and there's a large number of people lost work and income, and therefore, the amount of people who fell below the poverty line could be very high. And therefore, consumption would not revive easily. And let us also see that, middle class people and the upper middle class people will be very careful, because the third wave will impact the children. And when it impacts the children, they'll have to be very careful, because one parent would have to be with the child who has to be isolated. And the unfortunate part is that we didn't do enough of vaccination. If we had done starting with 10 crore vaccination in January, we may have had herd immunity by the time it was December. But at the current rate, we'll only have herd immunity only by the middle of next year, if we can step up, the vaccination. So by the second quarter and the third quarter, there's unlikely to be herd immunity, and the chances are that the wave would come, and therefore again another lockdown would come. And when another lockdown comes, it would be even more difficult to cope with. And that's why the economy will show negative growth in the third quarter and the second quarter, in spite of the low base.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying that the economy's rate of growth would be 0 or negative. And when Moody's, etc., are looking at growth, they're only looking at the government data. They are not independent data collecting agencies. Right. Neither ADP, nor IMF, nor Moody's. They only reanalyze the government data. So whatever the government data, they add plus minus 1 or 2% and give that out. IMF data is incorrect, ADP data is incorrect, Moody's data is incorrect. You have to reassess, bringing in the unorganized sector into the equation. We don't bring the unorganized sector into the equation. Let us see MSME also. Micro sector 6 crore units, small and medium are 6 lakh units, and large units are 6,000. So it's a 6 crore micro unit where 97% of the employment is that has been hit. And our government policies are unable to address the micro sector. Even the policy for MSME are for the small and medium, but they don't get the micro sector. That's why the government needs to have a separate program for the micro sector, how to boost it.
Right.
If we don't do that, employment will not come back. And therefore the poverty will continue, demand shortage will continue.
Right. So, Professor Aga, I'll come to you about the numbers, about the poverty, people who have been pushed to below poverty line, and indebtedness. As you heard, Professor Arun Kumar says the figure could be much more than 23 crore. What has been, the study that has put out. Can you hear me now?
Can you please repeat your question?
Yeah, my question is, you heard about the numbers we talked about. Professor Arun Kumar, I think you heard him about the figures about people who have been pushed below the poverty line and indebtedness because of this lockdowns, etc. And he says that figure could be much more than the study, which study says that 23 crore people have been pushed below poverty line. He says figure could be much higher if we take unorganized sector also into account. What do you say?
Well, I think the pandemic has hit the poorest of the poor the hardest, and especially the poor also. Especially when the national lockdown happened, the government provided a support for food as well as a certain amount of a cash facility for the poorest of the poor. Also, similarly for the MSMEs and for the unorganized sector, there was credit support which was offered to them. Also, to certain sectors like the housing or the other sectors, liquidity was provided by the RBI. So when we talk about the poorest of the poor, which needed the maximum amount of support, whether they were street hawkers or they were other people, I think the government would try to offer a certain amount of a support in terms of the credit which was available. So there were credit lines which were offered to them. Unfortunately, cash credit could not be possible, or cash facility could not be possible directly, because the fiscal deficit had already risen to a 9.5% level last year, and it is estimated to be at about 6.8%, which would be higher only, not lower. So, given the indebtedness of the government, it was only possible to extend possible money support to the banks as well as institutions to these people. Also, not bringing about a lockdown which can continuously support especially the unorganized labor. And if you see these lockdowns also, they have not stopped industrial activity, so that the poor and the unorganized sector involved can continue to offer work. Also, there has been a continuous support which are in the form of COVID loans or emergency credit lines that these continuously extended to the MSME sectors. Now, it is not possible to
but the question is how much of these loans have been availed of and how much people have benefited from that, isn't it? So,
well, yes, as per the government figures, there are a large number of people who have benefited from it. There could be more number of people that could have benefited from it. It's not that it has fully given support or it gives the same support as the cash support could have been given.
Right.
But as I said, the government has the restriction of taking debt on its own, which is already at a higher level for them, and the fiscal stimulus which they have offered is leading to a fiscal deficit of 9.5%.
Fiscal deficit is it is expected right now because it's a war-like situation. It's not an unusual situation. So, Professor Kumar, your last comments before we conclude about this loans provided to MSME sector, has it been beneficial?
Bulk of the loan, as FICCI itself has said, have gone to the small and medium sector and not the micro sector. Second is that when the companies are not working properly, when investment is down, then the demand for loan is also less. So last year, in fact, the banks were depositing 8 lakh crore with the RBI as the surplus liquidity. RBI was saying, why don't you lend it to the businesses? And they said, businesses are not demanding credit.
Yes.
So therefore, if the demand for credit is not there, how do we lend it out? So this was the problem, that because of output decline and the investment decline, demand for credit was low. So RBI's policies did not work because even though interest rate was cut and credit and liquidity was provided, but that work only when the demand comes up. Unfortunately, the government's policies were based on supply side rather than demand creating.
Right.
So therefore, the increase in the support to the poor people was at best 2.5 lakh crore.
The focus,
something like 10 lakh crore was needed. Now the fiscal deficit is not a problem because last year the US increased its fiscal deficit to 25% of GDP, and so did Europe and Japan. So 9% is nothing. We needed to do much more because our poverty is much greater and the need of the poor people is much greater than that in the USA.
Right.
So we could have stepped up to 12%, 13% very easily without there being much problem. And the Moody's etc. would not have looked at it as scared because other countries were having even higher fiscal deficit. So we were very conservative last year, and again this year we need to reformulate the budget right now because our tax collection will be less, our expenditures will be more, so deficit will be rising. And we are the 11% increase in the GDP. We are not going to get 11% increase in GDP. So therefore, budget is demand has to be created.
Demand has to be creative. Unfortunately, the time of this program is running out, has run out in fact. So I had to stop here. So, but thank you both of you for participating in this debate.
Thank you.
This is all in the agenda today. Thank you for watching. Viewers, I have an important piece of information to share with you. From tomorrow, your favorite program, the agenda, will be telecast at 6 p.m. instead of 8 p.m. Please take note of it. Till then, take care and stay safe. Goodbye.